now direct that the bell be rung for another 10 minutes.
On this day of the 22nd of February 2023, a broadcast that is brought to you by the Parliamentary Broadcasting Unit in partnership with KBC, and the Deputy Speaker of the National Assembly, Honorable Gladys Boss, has just directed that the quorum bell be rung for 10 minutes. This is according to the House Standing Order, to allow members who are yet to get into the chambers to be able to walk in and join the others before the House kicks off. The House, before it starts its business, has to achieve a quorum. But if there is no quorum, then the Speaker or the Chair, by order, the bell be rung for 10 minutes for members to walk in. And as you can see at the entrance of the National Assembly, then members are slowly trickling in. And once the quorum is achieved, then business for this afternoon will kick off. Talking about business for this afternoon is that members of the National Assembly will be resuming a debate on the proposal to Parliament to consider amending the Constitution and the standing orders. This is one of the motions that is lined up for consideration, a motion that is moved by the leader of the majority party. And this resumption is of a debate that was interrupted on Tuesday, February 21st, the year 2023. And the motion is on the debate on the proposal to Parliament to consider amending the Constitution and the standing orders. Remember, already a number of members had already given their opinions and views on this motion. So members who have not been able to give their opinions and views on this motion or participate in this debate, then this afternoon they will have that opportunity. This motion is one of 4 motions that are lined up for consideration. Currently is a quorum bell, but once the quorum is achieved, then a number of businesses will be considered. The report on the consideration of the Crops Coffee General Amendment Regulations 2022. This is by the Chairperson Committee on Delegated Legislation, and will be seeking the House to adopt the report of the Committee on Delegated Legislation on its consideration of the Crops Coffee General Amendment Regulations 2023 that was laid on the table of the House on Tuesday, February 21st, 2023. And pursuant to the provisions of Section 18 of the Statutory Instruments Act 2013 and Standing Order 210, subsection 4B, annuls in entirety the Crops Coffee General Amendment Regulations 2022 as publishing legal notice number 102 of 2022. So that is a motion that is lined up for consideration. The motion on the report of the consideration of the Consolidated Fund Services expenditures for the supplementary estimates number 1 of 2022-2023 by the Chairperson, Public Debt and Privatization Committee is also lined up for consideration this afternoon. And the Chairperson will be seeking the House to adopt the report of the Public Debt and Privatization Committee on its consideration of the Consolidated Fund Services expenditures for the supplementary estimates, of course, number 1 of 2022 and 2023, that was laid on the table of the House on Tuesday, February 21st, the year 2023. The motion on the report of the 42nd session of the Organization of Africa, Caribbean and Pacific States and the European Union Joint Parliamentary Assembly, a motion by the leader of the Kenya delegation to the OACPS EUJPA is also another motion that is lined up for consideration before the National Assembly this afternoon. And the leader of the Kenya delegation to the OACPS EUJPA will be seeking the House, or rather the House will be required to note that the report of the 61st session of the Organization of Africa, Caribbean and Pacific Parliamentary Assembly and the 42nd session of the SCP EU Joint Parliamentary Assembly that was laid on the table of the House on the Wednesday, November 30th, the year 2022. The quorum bell is still underway. Members are yet to achieve the requisite number for the House business to kick off. So the 10-minute quorum bell is still on. The motion on the general debate of the proposal to Parliament to consider amending the Constitution and the standing orders, according to the Leader of Majority, is that noting that contents of a memorandum submitted to Parliament by His Excellency the President asking Parliament to consider initiating amendments to the Constitution, acknowledging that actualization of the proposals which relate to inter alia the composition of Parliament as provided for in Articles 97 and 98 of the Constitution, in order to attain the two-thirds gender principle, the creation of the office of the Leader of the Official Opposition in Parliament, and the inclusion of various funds in the Constitution would necessitate amendment to the Constitution, while the restructuring of Parliament oversight to allow for Cabinet Secretaries to appear before the House of Parliament to respond to questions by members would require the amendment of the standing orders.
Member for Kinango. Okay, I'll give the Honorable Lillian Gogo, member for Rangwe.
Thank you so much, Honorable Speaker. This is a matter that is sensitive, especially matters touching on land. And we have the Makalda gold mines that are known in Migori. And even in Rangwe, Honorable Speaker, we have a small-time gold mines that engage our people. They also get their income from there by doing small-time processing. But there is a way people are thirsty for land in our country, Honorable Speaker, that even what would benefit the common man, the man that is at the lowest point, the bottom man, people still want to get it. And it is important that as the August House, Honorable Speaker, that we look at the sensitivity of issues, especially that affect land and that affect the common man. And this is a petition that has been brought on time by the Honorable Odege of Nyatike. And as a House, Honorable Speaker, it is important that we support taking this to the particular committee and looking up into what affects the common man. So here, Honorable Speaker, to support what Odege has brought to the House. And it's also important to look at the small pieces of land across the country where wananchi eka living to just take their children to school, and also, Honorable Speaker, just get some food and some roof over their head. So this is a matter that needs our attention as a House, even at the various committee levels, the concerned committee. And when we do this, Honorable Speaker, we do it for posterity, and we do it for the benefit of all the Kenyans I support. Thank you.
The Honorable Wilberforce Oundo.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. I stand to comment on the petition filed by the Member of Parliament for Nyatike constituency. The issue of land matters, Honorable Speaker, is an emotive matter that seems to have lived with us from time immemorial. It's emotive because land has got various facets, socio-economic, legal, and at times political aspect. Indeed, when the lease expire, naturally it's expected the land will revert back to the people who are the original owners. I do expect it has taken an eon for the matter to be resolved, which requires now an immediate end to a conclusion to the matter. It's therefore a call to National Land Commission and the relevant organs concerned to move with speed and restitute the land to the rightful owners as the law requires. On that, Honorable Speaker, I support the petition, and I hope the Public Petition Committee will move with speed to resolve this matter and set precedent on other pending matters of similar nature. Thank you, Honorable Speaker.
The Honorable Lel Mengit, member for Mgwen. The Honorable George Murugara. I'm looking for those who are in the intervention.
Yes.
Member for Tharaka.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I wish to comment on the petition by the Honorable Tom Odege, which I think is timely in view of the fact that the land in issue was left behind in the 70s, and those who have rightfully occupied it are actually without title. The issue of title deeds in the country is very important, especially to landowners. And as we press for the people of Nyatike, I'll also be pressing for the people of Tharaka constituency, because they are also in dire need of title deeds, in spite of the fact that they do have a land registry there. Therefore, as the Committee on Public Petitions moves the speed, I think the issue of title deeds in the country needs to be looked into expeditiously. I do support. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
And lastly, on that particular petition, the Honorable Majimbo Kalasinga of Kabuchai.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And Madam Speaker, before I give my issue opinion on this, I want also to join my friends here to congratulate you on how you elegantly chose your wardrobe. And Madam Speaker, after this, Madam Speaker, you might inbox me your designers, or my wife can also look like you are, Madam. Thank you, Madam Speaker. On the petition, Madam Speaker, from our honorable member for Nyatike, Madam Speaker, land as it is in Kenya is very emotive. And that one is just a test case, Madam Speaker. We have so many areas in this country where people are moved those days and leases were given. When they expire, Mr. Speaker, let's expedite that. And the people, and we do diligent allocations so the people who lost land, Madam Speaker, gain and make back their life. Some of their families, Madam Speaker, are languishing. Not only there, Madam Speaker, we have land in Bungoma and Trans Nzoia where follows same suit. So in that connection, Madam Speaker, I beg to support. Thank you.
Okay, next order.
Order number 5, papers.
Leader of Majority.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. I beg to lay the following papers on the table of the House today, Wednesday, February 22nd, 2023, afternoon sitting. One, legal notice number 8 of 2023 relating to tax procedures, common reporting standards, regulations 2023, and the explanatory memorandum from the National Treasury and Economic Planning. This, Honorable Speaker, is to be referred to the Committee on Delegated Legislation. 2, the session of paper number 1 of 2023 on Kenya National Population Policy for Sustainable Development from the National Treasury and Economic Planning. 3, reports of the Auditor General and financial statements in respect of the following institutions for the financial year ended 30th June 2019 and the certificates therein. A, Narok West Technical Training Institute, and B, Masai Mara Technical and Vocational College. 4, report of the Auditor General and financial statements in respect of the following institutions for the financial year ended 30th June 2020 and the certificates therein. 1, Belgut Technical Training Institute, and 2, Ugunja Technical and Vocational College. 5, reports of the Auditor General and financial statements of NGCDF in respect of the following constituencies for the financial year ended 30th June 2021 and the certificates therein. Moiben constituency, and I can see the honorable member for Moiben is behind me. Kisumu East, Ugunja, represented by the leader of minority. Kipkelion West, Keio South, Kuresoi South, Lugari, Matungu, Bumula, Lukuyani, all Kalau. And lastly, Honorable Speaker, reports of the Auditor General and financial statements of NGCDF in respect of the following constituencies for the financial year ended 30th June 2022. Not NGCDF, Honorable Speaker, this must be a mistake from the clerk's office. It is reports of the Auditor General and financial statements in respect of the following institutions for the financial year ended 30th June 2022 and the certificates therein. 1, East African Portland Cement, PLC. 2, Kenya Industrial and Entrepreneurship Project, credit number IDA 6268 KE. And 3, Center of Excellence in Sustainable Agriculture and Agribusiness Management, credit number 5798-KE. Thank you, Honorable Speaker.
Next order.
Order number 6, notices of motion.
Honorable Geoffrey Ruku, member for Beere North.
Honorable Speaker, I wish to give notice of the motion that aware that communities have continuously established running institutions within their localities to address the inadequate physical facilities to support the attainment of universal access to education, noting that the Kenya Vision 2030 envisioned progressive establishment of more schools, expansion and rehabilitation of the existing ones in order to improve access to education. Further noting that huge sums of funds, particularly under the National Government Constituencies Development Fund, have been invested in improving infrastructure in primary schools, acknowledging that in the recently introduced competence-based curriculum education system, pupils will transition from primary schools at class 6 and not class 8, as it was the case under the 844 system. Concerned that basing junior secondary schools in selected primary schools will render classroom facilities that previously housed classes 7 and 8 redundant, and that the arrangement would compel students to travel for long distances to access institutions where junior secondary schools are based. Further, concerned that the guidelines recently issued by the government directing that junior secondary schools be domiciled in the existing primary schools, yet most primary schools lack the capacity to accommodate an effective and effectively offer junior secondary schools curriculum. Deeply concerned that the guidelines were hurriedly developed and operationalized, this House urges the Ministry of Education to, 1, urgently develop a comprehensive junior secondary school policy in order to regularize and anchor the guidelines under the Basic Education Act 2012 to ensure that junior secondary schools are established and operated in every primary school. 2, develop a clear implementation framework for the competence-based curriculum at the junior secondary schools level, and provide for a funding plan for successful implementation of curriculum. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Next order.
Order number 7, questions and statements.
I think as the members are not ready, we'll rearrange the order, so we shall come back to order number 7. Next order.
Order number 8, motion, report on the consideration of the Crops Coffee General Amendment Regulations 2022.
Honorable Chepkonga, before you proceed, allow me to recognize some schools. I wish to recognize the presence in the Speaker's Gallery of Kabare Girls High School from Gishugu constituency, Kirinyaga County, and you must note that that is the former school of the Honorable Njeri Maina, County Member of Parliament for Kirinyaga, aka Gasheri. I also wish to recognize in the public gallery the presence of Molo Boys Academy from Molo constituency, Nakuru County. You are welcome to Parliament, to the National Assembly. Thank you. Honorable Chepkonga, you may proceed.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. Thank you, Honorable Speaker. I recognize the presence of the Honorable Pio and I, Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker. As you know, they had prayers this afternoon and morning. We hope that they also prayed for Parliament. That's why he's here. And we'd like to thank them very much for praying. You know, it's important to pray. No. Point of order against God. It's just that you prayed. Madam Speaker, I wish to move the following motion. That this House adopts the report of the Committee on Delegated Legislation on its consideration of the Crops Coffee General Amendment Regulations 2022, laid on the table of the House on Tuesday, February 21st, 2023, and pursuant to the provisions of Section 18 of the Statutory Instruments Act 2013, and standing under 210, paragraph 4b, annuls in entirety the Crops Coffee General Amendment Regulations 2022, published as legal notice number 102 of 2022. Madam Speaker, the regulations were tabled in Parliament and referred to the Committee on Delegated Legislation. They examined the regulations, they were presented, and we noted, Madam Speaker, that the regulations were intended to transfer the authority of issuing milling licenses from the county government to the Agriculture and Food Authority, that's AFA. 2 was to provide for the obligations of license holders and service providers and the protection and regulations of their interests along the value chain. 3, it was to recognize the coffee grower as the owner of the coffee until the coffee is sold and to provide for their rights along the value chain. 4 was to provide for a transparent and timely clearing and settlement of coffee sales proceeds to the growers and service providers. 6 was to provide for the various forms to be used for applications, collection, and maintenance of data in compliance with the regulations. And 7, finally, was to ensure improvement of coffee standards and increase production and support. Madam Speaker, the committee considered these regulations as published on the 9th of June 2022, via legal notice number 102 of 2022, that was submitted to the clerk of the National Assembly on the 9th of June 2022. That was during the time of elections, and that's the reason why these regulations were not considered immediately, because the House thereafter proceeded sine die because of the elections of that year, Madam Speaker. And so these regulations were laid in the House on the 4th of October 2022 within the statutory timeline set out in Section 11(1) of the Statutory Instruments Act. In that Article 10 and 118 of the Constitution, as read together with Section 5 and 5A of the schedule and the Statutory Instruments Act, together with the Standing Order 210, requires every regulation-making authority and persons to conduct public participation and sufficient consultation with the stakeholders and persons likely to be affected by the regulations. 3, that the committee noted with concern that contrary to the requirements that regulation-making authority or bodies conducts public participation and sufficient consultation with the stakeholders and persons likely to be affected by the regulations, the public participation was not sufficiently conducted with those that have been affected by these regulations. Madam Speaker, the Council of Governors, by the letter dated the 12th of May 2022, addressed to the Cabinet Secretary for Ministry of Agriculture, Livestock, Fisheries and Cooperatives, raised concerns that the regulations as published by the minister then were contrary to the provisions of Section 1 of Part 2 of the 4th Schedule of the Constitution for failure by the ministry to consult the Council of Governors. As you know, this is a devolved function. So it was expected that the Minister for Agriculture consults the Council of Governors or governors themselves, because this is a function that has been devolved. The fifth thing that we noted, Madam Speaker, is that the coffee farmers, in a letter that was addressed to the clerk of the National Assembly and copied to the chair of Committee on Delegated Legislation, it also expressed concerns on the failure by the ministry to incorporate or to consider their proposals in the published regulations. Madam Speaker, these regulations, if approved, will adversely affect the coffee farmers, as they have already stated, the areas in which they suspect or they think will adversely affect them. And those were pointed out to the Ministry of Agriculture, and there was no sufficient stakeholder participation as required by Article 118 of the Constitution, and so these regulations have infringed the Constitution. The sixth thing that we noted, Madam Speaker, that these regulations were supposed to give farmers an opportunity to grow, mill, and sell their own coffee. Being the net effect being that these amendments will lead to extending the licenses of previous players in the coffee value chain industry and continue to exclude the coffee farmers and millers from the trade of their produce. The Capital Markets Authority policy is that all commodity exchange is regulated through Capital Market Coffee Exchange Regulations 2021. If these regulations are approved, Madam Speaker, they will be in contravention of these particular regulations that have curtailed the presence of cartels in the coffee industry. As you know, there are people who have several companies. They have licenses for milling, and they have also licenses for marketing. So, Madam Speaker, the same persons who have two different licenses have indeed made the coffee industry to be pervaded with cartels and brokers to the detriment of the coffee farmers who are suffering because there have been too many deductions along the value chain. And so the money that goes to the farmer at the bottom, Madam Speaker, is very minimal, and therefore it's very discouraging to the coffee farmers. And that's why you see most of the coffee farmers are saying we would rather cut down the coffee trees instead of continuing to grow this coffee in which they do not benefit, they don't see value for it. And so these regulations are going to infringe on the rights of the coffee farmers. The eighth thing that we noted, Madam Speaker, is that this is a devolved function, as I've just stated, in which the counties have a regulatory role to play as per Part 2 of Section 1 of the 4th Schedule of the Constitution. The Crops Act, number 16 of 2013, Section 40, provides that Cabinet Secretary may make regulations for the better carrying into effect of the provisions of the Act in consultation with the authority and the county government. This was not done and therefore contravenes Article 259, paragraph 11 of the Constitution, as read together with Section 13A of the Statutory Instruments Act of 2013. The Crops Coffee Regulations, therefore, of 2019, sought to decentralize the regulatory role of the various players in the coffee chain industry, which was initially under the Ministry of Agriculture. The implication of approving the Crops and Coffee General Regulations 2022 will be to contravene these express provisions of the Constitution and the various statutes. Finally, Madam Speaker, that in addition to the need to undertake public participation, Sections 6, 7, and 8 of the Statutory Instruments Act that guides the operations and the consideration of regulations in the Committee of Delegated Legislation requires that a statutory making body undertakes regulatory impact assessment prior to making a regulatory instrument if the proposed instrument is likely to impose significant economic implication on the community or part of the community. The committee has observed upon scrutiny that the regulations by their very nature you have a problem with Honorable Mele, or is it Honorable Njoke, my earmate? No, it's not been. So I continue, Madam Speaker.
Proceed, Honorable Chepkonga. As long as he continues to raise his voice, as opposed to wait for the intervention.
So thank you, Madam
I
Speaker.
can see you over here, but you can't shout.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. He's used to TV, so no problem. He thinks it's part of it, it's an extension. But you know, Madam Speaker, I used to regulate their operation, so no problem. We can continue to do so.
And in any case, members are going to have a chance to contribute
absolutely.
to this motion. So let him finish moving, let the second, and then it will be open to members, because I know it's a very important topic.
Yeah, Madam Speaker, the import of what I'm saying is that the regulatory making authority did not conduct regulatory impact assessment as required by the law. And so we found this as being in contravention of the Statutory Instruments Act, and therefore we are proposing that this particular regulation be annulled in entirety. We do not seek to delete any part thereof. We think they are unconstitutional, and I therefore, Madam Speaker, that pursuant to Section 15, 1 of the Statutory Instruments Act, read together with Section 40 of the Crops Act, number 18 of 2013, and standing under 210(4)(b, the committee recommends to this House, Madam Speaker, to annul in entirety the legal notice on Crops Coffee General Amendment Regulations 2022 on the basis of the aforementioned reasons. And therefore, Madam Speaker, I would like to request the Vice Chair, the Honorable Kishimu, to second. I thank you.
What's your intervention before the second? What's your intervention, member for Tigania East, Mpuru Aburi?
My point of order, Madam Speaker, is I'm sorry because I can't recognize who is on the chair. Because you look beautiful than yesterday. Is there a stranger really?
Member, thank you for that. I'll take that as a compliment. Yeah, even though it's mischievously brought. The Vice Chairperson, Committee on Delegated Legislation.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Before Madam Speaker, I second the motion. I'd also like to associate myself with the students, the Speaker's Gallery, Kabare Girls, one of the best national schools, who come from my constituency. They are most welcome, although, Madam Speaker, you welcome them. Madam Speaker, I rise to second this motion. And Madam Speaker, it is a requirement by the Statutory Instrument Act that every regulatory making authority must adhere to various requirements that are enlisted under the Statutory Instrument Act. And one of the basic and the most important requirements is that a body must always conduct adequate or sufficient public participation. And in this case, Madam Speaker, as the Chair has correctly indicated, these regulations fell short of that requirement. And it is also suspicious that these regulations were introduced or they were brought to Parliament when this Parliament was just about to adjourn sine die, and members were very busy in their campaign trails. Madam Speaker, these regulations were seeking to amend the 2019 regulations, which were seeking to make the market for coffee, especially at the Nairobi Coffee Exchange, transparent, whereby there had been introduced a regulation whereby Capital Markets Authority was supposed to be overseeing the exchange or the trading of the commodity, that is coffee. And these regulations were actually removing the Capital Markets Authority. So the farmer was left bare with no one to watch over what is happening at the Nairobi Coffee Exchange. And again, the regulations were also seeking to remove the farmer from directly selling his or her coffee through the cooperatives. And this has been a problem for many years. And farmers have really been fighting for them to be given an opportunity to be able to sell their coffee at the exchange without many limitations. You remember, for those who are aware about the requirements under the previous regulations, was that a farmer or a cooperative society had to raise over 100 million shillings to be able to license to sell coffee directly at the exchange. And these regulations, the 2019 regulations, which were being sought to be amended by the 2020 regulations, were removing that aspect of the farmer having direct access and having a miller market license. And they were restoring the previous problem that was there, that the miller, the current multinational millers, were now being restored to be the only people who are licensed to sell coffee to the auction. Madam Speaker, The other aspect of these regulations was that there was no regulatory impact assessment report, which is a very main requirement. And looking at the impact of the regulations, they affected millions or hundreds of thousands of farmers in this country. That is a very serious issue that would have required a regulatory impact assessment to be availed to the committee. Madam Speaker, because of, for the interest of time, because I can see that I'm almost exhausting my time, I must say that coffee farmers are happy about whatever we are doing because the law was not followed, and we'll have to stick to protect the coffee farmers of this country, and I second.
Give him 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I think it was very important for the last part to be captured, that I second the motion for annulment of the regulations so that we can liberate farmers of this country in the coffee sector. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Yes. Honorable members, I now propose the question that this House adopts the report of the Committee on Delegated Legislation on its consideration of the Crops Coffee General Amendment Regulations 2022, laid on the table of this House on Tuesday, February 21st, 2023, and pursuant to the provisions of Section 18 of the Statutory Instruments Act 2013 and Standing Order 210 4B, annuls in its entirety the Crops Coffee General Amendments Regulations 2022, published in Legal Notice number 102 of the year 2022. Honorable members, you shall each have 5 minutes, including the leadership, to be able to contribute to this motion. And while I'm on my feet, I wish to again recognize the presence of Kabare Girls High School from Gishugu constituency, Kirinyaga County, which is not only the former school of the Honorable Jerry Maina, County Member of Parliament for Kirinyaga, but also the former school of the Honorable Mary Maingi, Member of Parliament for Mwea constituency in Kirinyaga County. So if you want your daughter to be a formidable woman leader, you probably need to send them to Kabara Girls High School. Thank you. The Honorable Leader of Majority.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. I was just restraining myself from speaking about schools, but let me also take this opportunity to welcome the indomitable Kabare girls and also the boys' school. Honorable Speaker, you know, there has been a lot of accolade to the girls from Kabare girls, but there was also the boys' school that you recognized, Molo Boys in Molo constituency. I'm sure the Member of Parliament for Molo may not have attended the school, but it is indeed a great school, just like Mishinda Secondary is in Elbagon. But of course, following the Alliance High School, where I attended. Yes, Honorable Speaker, I hear the Honorable Kainan say the Alliance High School. It is the Alliance High School, not Alliance Boys. It's called the Alliance High School. Honorable Speaker, I rise to support the report and the recommendation by the Committee on Delegated Legislation to nullify in entirety those regulations. And Honorable Speaker, I must take this opportunity to commend the Delegated Legislation Committee under the able leadership of Honorable Chepkonga. And you remember at the beginning of this session, last session, Honorable Speaker, I think it's the Honorable Chepkonga or the Honorable Murugara who rose on a point of order on the question of how ministries and the executive treat the subject of delegated legislation. And indeed, in the last regime, Honorable Speaker, there was gross abuse of delegated legislation. And regulations, Honorable Speaker, were being enacted and being given the force of law without having the force of law. Because they were effecting regulations and harassing Kenyans all over on regulations that have neither been approved. Some had not even been tabled before this House, and people are being forced to follow such regulations. It therefore behoves on us to commend the Committee on Delegated Legislation that indeed they have risen to the occasion to ensure that nobody ignores the legislative role of members of parliament and what this House has been established to do under the Constitution. That it is only this House, Honorable Speaker, that has the power to legislate. And even those who have been given powers to legislate through delegated legislation, they must follow the Statutory Instruments Act and also the Constitution of Kenya and ensure all such regulations are scrutinized by the people's representatives for them to enjoy the force of law. Honorable Speaker, if you looked at those regulations, these are regulations that sought to extend licenses to people who are both millers and marketers. And Honorable Speaker, we don't need to be neuroscientists to know that these are cartels that have ensured that coffee farmers in this country do not enjoy the sweat of their labor. Honorable Speaker, members may wish to visit Sharia House and check who are the shareholders of new KPCU. And you'll be shocked. The former minister who was the author, the Honorable Peter Munya, who was the author of these regulations, had registered himself as a shareholder of new KPCU and not as the Minister of Agriculture or the Cabinet Secretary, where ordinarily if the ministry is to hold shares, it is the Principal Secretary's office and not the Principal Secretary in person who should hold such shares. Therefore, Honorable Speaker, let me commend this committee because this committee has now acted to save the Kenyan coffee farmer. And eventually, I do hope that when regulations are done, they will be done not for the benefit of cartels, not for the benefit of a few people who are behaving as millers and marketers and brokers and crooks at the same time, Honorable Speaker, but for the benefit of the man and woman who sweats it out to grow coffee, Honorable Speaker, across our country, from Mount Elgon to Kiambu to Githongori to Kirinyaga, Honorable Speaker, so that our farmers enjoy the real sweat of their farmers. As we commend our very good coffee farmers, especially those that I have seen in the recent past in Kirinyaga, who are earning close to 90,000 shillings for a 50 kg bag. Honorable Speaker, that is what we meant when we said bottom up, that money goes back to the people's pocket and it goes to the farmer. And I therefore...
The Honourable Member for Mwea, Honourable Mary Maingi. The Honourable John Waweru, Member for Dagoretti South.
Madam Speaker, on this one, I'm going to be very brief. In fact, I stand to support the annulment of these regulations in their entirety. The case has been made by the mover of the motion. The seconder actually did rubber stamp what needs to get done. Madam Speaker, coffee should be seen as gold in this country. Madam Speaker, coffee is the heritage of this country. When you go out there, you are told of how high the quality of the Kenyan coffee is. So high that it is not even used in its raw form. It is used as a blend for coffees from around the world. But Madam Speaker, the blood, sweat, tears of the farmers have gone unrewarded for over 60 years, Madam Speaker. This is because this was a crop that was a colonial crop. The new Africans who took power after the colonialist left wanted to be a black colonialist. They wanted to be a black white man. So they perpetrated the laws, the rules, and all the things that were governing the coffee sector. Madam Speaker, today as we speak, coffee in Kenya, in terms of its development, in terms of its enterprise, has not moved an inch from where the colonialists left us. In fact, it is worse off. When you go to a county, like where the constituency that I represent is hived from, our constituency was hived off Kiambu County in 1969. Today, if you go to Kiambu County, you will find that it has gotten to a point where farmers are opting to uproot coffee, to plant apartments, so that they can harvest rent. Because when they harvest the beans, they do not have any commercial meaning to them. So, Madam Speaker, what we are doing here this afternoon is righting the wrongs that were perpetrated by people who are supposed to actually be superintending the sector. So if there is any important business that this House will conduct, it is righting the wrongs by supporting the annulment of these coffee regulations in their entirety. We shall be curing big mischief that was occasioned by people who in the first place should have been curing the mischief. The coffee farmer out there is keen to see if this new administration is concerned about the planter of the coffee. This coffee that is being taken in places like New York, in the Starbucks, in the other places where it has been processed and branded, they want to get a benefit out of it. And one of the ways of making sure that the farmer gets a benefit is by first getting the policies right, the legislations right, and the regulations that govern over this sector. Madam Speaker, the coffee industry needs to roar back into life, and it cannot do that if we do not get the regulations, the policy, and the legislation right. I do support the annulment in their entirety. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Honorable members, if you want to contribute to this particular motion, kindly press your intervention button. I can see the first one was the Honorable John Gitonga for Manyata constituency, MP for Manyata constituency.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. When coffee is mentioned in this House, Honorable Speaker, I get very happy. Because in my constituency, Manyata constituency, Honorable Speaker, we have depended on coffee all our lives. We have closed factories since the 90s. Some areas used to be very rich, but these days, Honorable Speaker, people are actually languishing in poverty because of lack of good prices for coffee. Honorable Speaker, I want to welcome with open arms the annulment of this draconian law that was passed in 2022. Honorable Speaker, I think it's a shame that, and we got to redeem ourselves as this 13th Parliament on the laws that are being passed. Honorable Speaker, I'm one of the person who is following keenly through the Office of the Deputy President the issues that we have to work with in terms of redeeming our farmers that do coffee farming. And as we are speaking in the caucus of coffee, we have realized everything from the start to the end, Honorable Speaker, is opaque in terms of coffee trade. And Honorable Speaker, we have to call it out as it is, because the farmers out there are depending on it. The Nairobi Coffee Exchange, as it is right now constituted, has almost zero representation in terms of small-scale trader and small-scale farmer, Honorable Speaker. We need to review that and ensure that our farmers are well represented in this coffee trade. Honorable Speaker, while we are doing the new regulations, we need to remove the taxes that come with the issue of value addition for our coffee. It is a shame that if you want to package your coffee here, and when it is packaged elsewhere, it is almost 40 to 50% more expensive, Honorable Speaker. those are things that we have to look at as this House and put things right. I'm hoping the new regulation will empower our farmers. We need to know that this crop is for our farmers, and we need to actually protect the small-scale farmer that takes his or her coffee to the society that is supposed to be taken. Honorable Speaker, I saw a video just a few days ago of a young lady from this country presenting a beautiful presentation to Shark Tank. And she actually got herself close to 44 million Kenya shillings when she was describing Kenyan coffee. As government, Honorable Speaker, we have to market our coffee. We have to put it out there that we have good coffee, and also market our Kenyan coffee as Kenyan coffee. And I know, Honorable Speaker, that our coffee can fetch even better prices, Honorable Speaker. I want to support this motion, and we need to annul those regulations and put it right for the best of our farmers in this country. Thank you, Honorable Speaker.
Thank you. The Honorable Dr. Makali Mulu, member for Kitui Central.
Yeah, thank you very much, Honorable Speaker. Honorable Speaker, I want to support the committee in annulling these, in annulling the regulations, Honorable Speaker. Honorable Speaker, I just want to raise two issues, which to me I think are critical. And even if the other reasons were not there, these two will actually kill these regulations. One of them, Honorable Speaker, is the issue of public participation. Honorable Speaker, you know the Constitution is very clear that if you want to do anything which will benefit the public, you must involve them. And I know, Honorable Speaker, the chairs already indicated that there was no public participation. So on that basis, these regulations become an unsetter. The second issue, Honorable Speaker, which is critical, is this country, through the new constitution, we have two levels of government. We have the national government and we have the county government, Honorable Speaker. So anything which touches on devolution, where we have devolved functions, the counties must be involved, Honorable Speaker. This is another case where we are doing regulations which at the end of the day will be used at the lower level, and we are not involving those who will be using them or applying them. On those bases, Honorable Speaker, then, I think really we should not even waste time discussing this. We just need to support the committee, annul these regulations, and if there will be need in the future, they can resubmit them to this House. With those remarks, Honorable Speaker, I support the committee's position. Thank you, Honorable Speaker.
The Honorable Member for Emuhaya, Omboko Milema.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker, for this chance. And I want to support the committee and also laud what they have done, and they have given their facts very clearly why they have annulled these regulations. Honorable Speaker, and it's good you gave me this chance. I had a chance to travel with you to a meeting of governors, and they were very clinical and concerned about certain bills which concern the county governments. One of them happens to have been the coffee bill. Another one was the sugar cane bill, among others. And you remember, Honorable Speaker, the real complaint they had is that these are devolved functions, which somewhat the national government under the ministries has taken over and sometimes obtains laws and proceeds to make regulations without even consulting them. So we have seen such a case study on the floor of the House as annulled by this particular committee, and I want to congratulate them. Because the key main stakeholder in the coffee and all other agricultural related issues is the county government. The fact that they were not consulted, then it makes it very, very difficult to proceed with such a type of law. Also, the regulatory authority did not do the impact assessment, which actually should have brought in the farmers to give their opinion on how they want their own coffee to be regulated. And therefore, I totally support the annulment. In this country, Honorable Speaker, this is not only happening in the coffee sector or the agricultural sector, but somewhat very many ministries and CSS, very many independent commissions are now making laws and walking away with it, Honorable Speaker. These laws are either made as regulations. In fact, I'm studying one from an independent commission. Others are simply made as circulars, and they start operating. Honorable Speaker, I'm telling you, there are a number of laws and regulations that are affecting people which have not been looked into. And therefore, I would wish that the committee goes ahead to actually ask all those regulations, all those circulars that are operating as laws without going through the House or the Committee of Parliament, where they should actually get the authority to become laws, to be annulled. Such a case is what we are dealing with at the Teacher Service Commission. So when I see so many motions here about education, I'm reminded of the many regulations and many circulars that are operating as laws in this country, yet they never went through this particular parliament. And they're affecting not only the teachers, but people in general. I love the committee, and thank you for giving me this chance.
Honorable Member for Bonchari Constituency, Charles Onchoke.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would be remiss if I didn't take notice and appreciate your splendid attire, and indeed all the honorable ladies who've adorned the African wear. I think as the men we need to, I repeat, Madam Speaker, you got that. So the coffee crops regulations is just one among the many regulations that the agencies or the bodies are making those regulations have flouted the law that enables them to make those regulations. I'm a member of the delegated legislation, and a lot of those regulations have come to our notice, and it's very sad that it's gone on for a long time unabated. I think it's time that Parliament crack the whip and all of those regulations are annulled so that the law can be followed. Just yesterday, I had the privilege and honor to accompany some of my colleagues to the Nairobi Coffee Exchange. And it was very interesting. A number of questions were asked. But this particular question about the ownership and the nature of the Nairobi Stock Exchange as an organization, we saw the person who was taking us around go around it, didn't want to face it. So I think this is just an indication that this is a mischief that should be corrected and shouldn't be allowed to continue, shouldn't be allowed to go on. It's going to affect many farmers. A lot of farmers, particularly where I come from in Bonchari, have suffered because of this kind of legal framework that disadvantages them and doesn't benefit them, doesn't support them to grow the crop that ordinarily should be earning Kenya a lot of money, and which money should be going to them as the people who sweat, who take the burden of farming or growing the coffee. My own family grows coffee, but over the years, we have been victims of this poor legal framework, which has disadvantaged us, which has made us not to earn the money that we should be earning from the coffee growing. So, Madam Speaker, I want to support that these regulations, alongside others that have been made in the same manner, which contravene the Statutory Instruments Act and other laws, be annulled so that we can be a country of laws, we can be a country that follows order, and we can reward those who do well, particularly our farmers. With that, I support.
Thank you. The Honorable Timothy Toroitich, member for Marakwet West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, for giving me this opportunity to contribute on this very important motion. Madam Speaker, I join my colleagues in supporting the annulment of the regulations. But be that as it may, Madam Speaker, we have to critically look, because we are annulling the regulations. So what next? Madam Speaker, the problem lies in the Statutory Instruments Act of 2013. Madam Speaker, the way that law was quoted or written, it purports to take away the powers of this House to make law. Madam Speaker, that law provides only two instances. It provides that that committee that looks at a statutory instrument, as a regulation, can either assent to it or annul that particular regulation. Madam Speaker, that leaves the committee with very few choices to either accept the regulation as it comes from the ministry, as it is, or the option of annulling it. Madam Speaker, if the committee does not agree with a particular provision in a particular regulation or a statutory instrument, then that means the committee has no choice but to be able to annul that particular instrument. So, Madam Speaker, I call upon the committee to relook at that legislation, the Statutory Instruments Act of 2013, to relook also at our standing orders, so that we can be able to propose amendments, so that when our regulations come from a ministry and the committee, that is the committee on the delegated legislation, does not agree to it, then that committee has the option of proposing amendments to that particular regulation. Because, Madam Speaker, it leaves the committee with their hands tied. They cannot be able to relook at that particular legislation or particular regulation in its substantial manner. So, Madam Speaker, I propose, and I second, of course, I support the annulment, but we should also look for a way of relooking at the law on Statutory Instruments Act with a view of amending any regulation that comes before a particular committee. Madam Speaker, secondly, this House has been given power to make law. That power has purportedly been taken by the ministry. Madam Speaker, when we have a legislation in this House, that legislation comes to this House, first reading, second reading, committee stage, until that law is finally adopted by this House. The question is this: why can't we adopt a procedure in this House where a regulation is brought before the House, this House in its entirety can be able to review a regulation? Why are we limiting the scrutiny of a legal framework or a legal document to a bill? Yeah, Madam Speaker, going forward, we must be able to, as a House, to relook at a regulation in its totality, so that we can be able to have have laws that this House has properly approved. So, Madam Speaker, I support the motion as moved, but it is my prayer that this House will be able to look at the entire legal framework insofar as statutory instruments are concerned, with a view of reviewing the same. Thank you, Madam Speaker, for the chance to contribute.
Thank you. The Honorable Member for Kisii County, Honorable Donya Doris.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. For those members who are not here in the morning, we were congratulating our dear Madam Speaker. She's looking beautiful, plus other women who are dressed African. Please stand up and clap for yourself. Thank you. To proceed, Madam Speaker, we had a Kenyan delegation of Scout members to Korea. When we arrived in Korea, they didn't only call us Kenyans, but they said, "You come from our best land where we enjoy your coffee." Kenyan coffee is loved. It's very expensive when you move out there. Having these regulations and laws, we should now make sure that our farmers enjoy their hard work by regulating their prices, starting from for the commodity itself. The prices of coffee should be looked into, farm inputs, and even making sure that we help them in terms of infrastructure. When I was a young girl, I remember our grandfathers, they used to pay our fees from coffee produce. Then one day, my grandfather told me like this, why I love planting coffee is because it helps in soil erosion. So some of the challenges we have, like not having sufficient food, maybe it's because we are not taking care of our soil. And by having more coffee farmers, we'll definitely be improving the fertility of our soil. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
The Honorable Maina Mathenge, member for Nyeri Town.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. I stand to support the annulment of the coffee regulations 2022. Madam Speaker, but the House cannot celebrate the annulment of those regulations because what is the status quo that we'll be resorting to? If the status quo had been good, if the status quo had been benefiting the coffee farmer, there would never have been need to introduce new regulations. And therefore, this House must move with speed to ensure that the intention behind the first step to introduce new regulations is achieved. Madam Speaker, when we go to the coffee exchange, where coffee in this country is being traded, nobody at the coffee exchange today is willing to reveal to Kenyans who owns the Nairobi Coffee Exchange. So we have a commodity worthy billions of shillings, millions of shillings, being traded in the hands of people who cannot say who they are and what stake they have in the coffee trade and in the coffee value chain. Madam Speaker, when you look at the platform that is used to trade our coffee, we do not know who is the owner of this platform. We do not know what kind of controls and interventions they are able to make in the back office in our coffee trade. Madam Speaker, these regulations helped assist the cartels that have exploited our coffee farmers once more in the hands of their government. The extended licenses of 11 marketers who have just mutated from being millers, and therefore they are also the auctioneers at the Nairobi Coffee Exchange. So I support this motion, but I urge this House to move with speed to ensure that the Kenyan coffee farmer is given back the power to sell and mill the produce that they labor over the years. Why does the Kenyan farmer need a license to sell their coffee? Why does the Kenyan farmer need a license to mill their coffee? Why does the Kenyan farmer need a guarantee to go and sell their coffee in the international market or directly? These are barriers that are used to ensure that the Kenyan coffee farmer is made a slave of the cartels and the brokers in the coffee chain. I support. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The Honorable Richard Yagon, member for Bometis, what's your intervention?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Honorable Speaker, I rise under the Standing Order 95 to request that the mover be called upon to reply. Members have canvassed the issue and are all in support of the motion, so we can conclude it. We can conclude it now and move on to the next business. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Okay, members are in agreement. Member to mover to, second reply. Honorable members, I now put the question that this House adopts the report of the Committee on Delegated. Yeah, the mover was supposed to reply, yes. Okay. Okay, I now put the question that the mover be called to reply. Is as many as of that opinion say aye? Aye. Is as many of that opinion say nay? The nays have it. I think next, the Honorable Rosa Buyu, member for Kisumu West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, for this opportunity. Madam Speaker, I don't come from coffee growing area, but I love the smell of coffee, and I like the taste of coffee. Madam Speaker, it is true that Parliament has a responsibility and the leeway to actually relook at some of these regulations, and if they do not satisfy or if they do not work for the common wananchi, the Parliament actually has the power to nullify them. But listening to the majority leader, Madam Speaker, it seems that his sole reason for wanting to nullify this regulation is driven by the fact that Honorable Munya was the one who spearheaded the regulations. Madam Speaker, I want to emphatically say that if we want to relook at these regulations, it must be in the interest of Kenyans, because Kenya belongs to Kenyans. We know some quarters think that Kenya belongs to just a certain segment of Kenya. But I want to say that if we are going to nullify these regulations, it must be driven by the benefit that is going to have on all Kenyans, or Kenyans who actually grow coffee. So I'd like to say in this House, Madam Speaker, I'd like to say in this House, Honorable Speaker, and you confused me because Madam Speaker was on that chair. I'd like to emphatically say that I think the leader of majority needs to be well informed that this country called Kenya is not a company with specific shareholders. It's for all Kenyans. And whatever we do in this House, like relooking at those regulations, must be for the benefit of all those Kenyans. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Excuse me, and okay. The next member is the Honorable Cynthia Muge. Can I have the standing orders, please?
Thank you, Honorable Speaker, for the opportunity to contribute to this motion. I want to say that I support the motion as moved by the Honorable Chepkonga in entirety. Honorable Speaker, the issue of coffee is a very important issue in this country, and it is one of the very good crops that the people of Kenya grow for them to survive economically and financially. Honorable Speaker, I share the same feeling with the Committee on Delegated Legislation that went through these regulations, because the issues that this regulation was trying to address are not the pertinent issues that are facing the people of Kenya who are actually coffee farmers. Honorable Speaker, we have issues with shortage of capital or money for the people to be able to make their farms better in terms of, and also infrastructure, Honorable Speaker. Honorable Speaker, the other issues that are facing coffee is the issue of labor. Honorable Speaker, for any person who is a farmer of coffee, they know how hard it is during the harvesting season for you to get adequate labor for you to be able to actually pick the berries. Honorable Speaker, we have issues with diseases. The diseases that are affecting the coffee farmers, Honorable Speaker, including and not limited to the berry diseases, the leaf rust that is actually disturbing so many farmers. Honorable Speaker, for a regulation to be brought and amended and is not addressing any of the mentioned issues, Honorable Speaker, is actually an insult to the farmers of this country. And I want to appreciate this committee because it actually did did its job diligently and ensured that it looked at the pertinent issues that are affecting the people of Kenya, the farmers of coffee in this country to be specific, and in their wisdom, Honorable Speaker, have resorted to annul it in its entirety, Honorable Speaker. Honorable Speaker, mismanagement of the cooperatives is a big issue, the cooperative societies, it's a big issue. It is a problem that is even making coffee farmers not receive their pay in due time. And Honorable Speaker, as we speak, many people have actually taken their coffee berries to the cooperatives, and they have not been paid because of mismanagement, Honorable Speaker. So, Honorable Speaker, I want to say that the other issues that were raised by the committee are also very pertinent issues, Honorable Speaker. How are you going to amend a regulation that touches on the Constitution of Kenya, the fourth schedule, Honorable Speaker, which is talking about the separation of functions between the county and the national government? This particular regulation, Honorable Speaker, if you look at it keenly, was trying to amend issues that actually touch on county governments in terms of their functions without sufficiently involving those stakeholders who include and not limited to county CEOs. So, Honorable Speaker, I want to say that I support this motion and I support it in entirety, and I just want to ask the committee also, especially the Committee on Agriculture, to be able to go a step further and be able to go through these regulations further to be able to help the farmers of Kenya, the coffee farmers of Kenya, which I am included, Honorable Speaker. Honorable Speaker, the other issue that this particular regulation was supposed to be sorting out is uniform prices for coffee. We cannot be having a different coffee price for the farmers in central Kenya or whatever part of the country and farmers in the Rift Valley part of the country, Honorable Speaker. Coffee is coffee. It is only graded, and that makes the difference. But the regions should not be making the difference. Honorable Speaker, these are issues that are supposed to be sorted out in the regulations and not these other issues that are not making sense, Honorable Speaker. So I support the annulment of these regulations in entirety for non-compliance, Honorable Speaker, with the Constitution and other statutory regulations in this country. So I support, Honorable Speaker. Thank you.
The Honorable Abraham Kirwa. What's up?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the opportunity to support this motion to nullify this regulation. Mr. Speaker, coffee is considered number 2 traded commodity in the world after oil. Coffee is named as black gold, which is truly a commodity that should be able to help our farmers in a very big way. In Kenya, Kenya's coffee is considered as the top 5 coffees in the world. It is one of the commodities that many people look forward to having. But the unfortunate part is that the cartels made its way into this house, and they were able to pass a regulation that was going to be against the farmers who are growing coffee. So, Mr. Speaker, we ought to be very careful as lawmakers so that we look out for the interest of the farmers, because that regulation was not giving the farmer the freedom to sell its coffee to whoever he wants. A few individuals was going to give them the responsibility to market, to sell, and only the farmer to just grow the coffee, and whatever price they give, that was it. So I support, and even moving forward, I think there should be a task force, a team that has to be set to sit down and really look into the issue of coffee. Because Kenya has been growing coffee for the last 1 century, from 1893. We've been growing coffee in this country. Coffee has contributed to the GDP and to the economy of this country in a very big way, which we should, as a nation, really take serious actions to make sure that the farmers who are growing coffee will continue to earn, and also to be a cash crop that will help us as a nation to bring in foreign exchange. At the moment, we are struggling as a country on Forex. And one of the reasons we are struggling